Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon for those on the East Coast. We'll be starting in just a moment. All right, it looks like a lot of folks are trickling in. It's right at starting time. So I want to welcome everyone to the Electric Vehicle Association's webinar entitled Cash on the Hood. We're going to take a look today at the new 2024 EV tax credit changes. Hopefully provide you some great information about how you can take advantage of these tax credits to build on our cars and making sure that everybody has access to electric vehicles. And we're going to explain that with some of these great panelists that we have here today. First thing we're going to do is a little housekeeping, I believe. So if we can go to the next slide. Actually, first we should introduce myself. Good morning. Again, my name is Kate Crook. I'm the member of the board of directors for the National Electric Vehicle Association, and I'm also the director of partner engagement with Linkwell. Linkwell and my team, we power the next generation of EV networks, and we build and charge management systems for EV networks across the country. As an EV driver myself, I am so excited to be here to make sure that we gain access to electric vehicles as well as the infrastructure needed to fuel them. And while we're not going to be talking about other tax credits for charging stations and charging infrastructure, I want to let you all know that there are some of those tax credits out there to fuel infrastructure as well. But first, today, we're going to talk about the tax credits that are eligible and available to you to to get electric vehicles into your home. So again, we have some great panelists here today. We've got Dr. Elaine Buckman, as well as Congressman Paul Tonko, and John Hyam, also from the Board of Directors, who's an expert in this field. Again, so we're going to start with some housekeeping, just so everybody's aware. There is a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, so if you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to post them there. There's also an opportunity to move them up and vote them up so that we can take advantage of the time that we have together and get the questions that are most important to you answered. All attendees will be muted. And I want to let you know that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on myeva.org, as well as links sent out in social media. So if you are not connected with the Electric Vehicle Association, this is a great opportunity for you to like and subscribe to all of our social media platforms so that you can follow along with the information presented here today and throughout the year. Next slide. For those of you who may be new to the Electric Vehicle Association, or this is your first time joining us, I just want to let you know that we are the leading volunteer organization that supports the acceleration of EV adoption. We have over 100 chapters across North America. So if you're not connected, there's very likely an organization or a small chapter in your area. So make sure you stay connected. We advocate for policies that support EV adoption, and we offer access to educational resources to help you promote EV adoption across the country. So without further ado, we want to make sure that we have our time spent wisely. I want to introduce Congressman Paul Tonko. Congressman Tonko is an 8th-term member of the U.S. House of Representatives, representing New York's 20th congressional district in the Capital Region, my hometown, so including cities of Albany, Schenectady, Troy, and Saratoga Springs. He has dedicated his career in public service to bettering the lives of those in his district with meaningful legislation that creates good jobs, strengthens the middle class, and drives economic opportunity. Congressman Tonko is the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Environment, Manufacturing, and Critical Materials, which we're going to talk about today. In addition to serving on the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Energy, Climate, and Grid Security, and the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, he's also a member of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Along with his committee duties, Congressman Tonko co-chairs the Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition, the SEEC, and Addiction Treatment and Recovery Caucus. And what's really important too is prior to serving in Congress, Congressman Tonko was the president and CEO of NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And before that, he served in the New York State Assembly for 25 years, serving for 15 years as chairman of the Committee on Energy. So he definitely knows some things that we're going to talk about today. Congressman Tonko is himself an EV driver and has graciously participated in our National Drive Electric Week in Schenectady, New York for several years, advocating and an advocate for ensuring access to EV technology and infrastructure. So without further ado, Congressman Tonko, I'll let you take it away.
Hey, thank you, Kate. So kind of you to have me join with everyone today. I thank Elaine and John also from the Electric Vehicle Association. And Kate, as a friend, I appreciate all of the work you do in our region and happy to see the success of Livingston Energy. Every time I'm there, it's growing by leaps and bounds. And thank you for being out there promoting clean energy and good sustainability and stewardship of our planet Earth. So great work. Thank you so much. Proud to be affiliated with all of you. I'm so proud of the work that has been done in the past 2 years to accelerate our nation's energy transition, and that includes many new and expanded investments to clean up our transportation system, a major contributor to carbon. The transportation sector accounts for the largest source of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, some 28%, and the majority of these emissions are from passenger cars and from trucks. And luckily, there has been tremendous progress in deploying infrastructure and providing incentives to support the sale of electric options. And despite some reports to the contrary, EVs are continuing to grow at a rapid pace. Total EV sales for the third quarter of 2023 rose nearly 50% compared to a year prior and accounted for a record 7.9% of all sales. I myself became an EV owner last year. I have to tell you, for those of us who are wondering where the next generation is, when I pulled my car into one of the local convenience shops, I came out after paying for a couple of my purchases, came out and ran into 3 middle school age youngsters, all of whom said, "Mister, is that your car?" And I said, "Yeah." They go, "Is that the Mach-E?" And I said, "Yeah." They knew the whole thing, the range, all this stuff. These are 7th graders. And I said, "How do you guys know all this?" He said, "Oh, we're into this." So take comfort, everybody, that the next generation is really into checking out what we're doing here with EVs. And it made me feel really good. And they even knew the selling price. So they're kind of savvy. But we know more must be done because we know there are still barriers to EV adoption. And Congress has worked hard to try to address some of those issues. For one, in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we invested $7.5 billion to support the build-out of EV charging infrastructure across the country. And the first of those chargers are starting to be installed. So hopefully we'll see the proliferation of well-placed and well-maintained charging networks to reduce people's range anxiety. And similarly, the IRS has recently released guidance to support a revamped tax credit for charging infrastructure. Second, we are growing a domestic supply chain to make certain that American-made EVs are available to consumers. There have been tens of billions of dollars invested in EV and battery production, critical materials processing and recycling, and other manufacturing that is necessary to support the U.S. market. Manufacturers have announced enough production capacity to build about 5 million EVs domestically in 2030, which will create many, many high-quality jobs. And finally, the purpose of today's discussion, Congress has sought to make EVs more affordable to Americans through the Inflation Reduction Act's Clean Vehicle Credit. Now, I know manufacturers are working, excuse me, to make certain their vehicles fully qualify for this incentive, which requires not only getting the cost of vehicles down, but also ensuring that they meet domestic content requirements in the law. If all goes well, many consumers will be able to access up to $7,500 in federal incentives, which is intended to be claimed at the point of sale. So people immediately experience those savings. And for the first time ever, there will also be an incentive for used EVs, which will allow people who may not be in the market for a new car to still be able to go electric. So I'm very hopeful that the Clean Vehicle Credit is going to change the way people think about EV ownership. According to Consumer Reports, despite the tremendous growth in EVs on the roads these past few years, only 7% of Americans have ever actually driven an EV, and only 17% have ever been a passenger. So we have a long way to go to educate consumers and encourage them to explore whether an electric vehicle is indeed the right option for them. But the first step is making these vehicles more affordable. I am confident that if people give EVs a chance and understand all of those given benefits, including these tax incentives, they will be much more likely to purchase or lease an EV as their next car. So I'm grateful for the work that the Electric Vehicle Association is doing to get this information out to the public. And I'm certain today's presentations will be a step toward helping people understand the impacts of this tax credit and the process by which they access those credits. So thank you again for the invitation to join this discussion. I look forward to working together to continuing to keep Americans going electric. And as Kate knows, I represent Schenectady in the middle of my district, which is called the
Electric City.
You got it, Kate. Thanks. So
Thank you,
from the Electric
Congressman.
City, have a great discussion and great to work with you. I'm proud to be a part.
Thank you, Congressman Tonko, for all you do for advocating for the affordable and accessible access to electric vehicles. As a driver yourself, you know exactly what it means to be an EV driver and what we need to do to get people to understand this technology and embrace it. So thank you for all you're doing to represent what we are trying to help elevate here with the Electric Vehicle Association. And thanks for your support of all of this legislation that is helping to advocate and educate all Americans to move towards a cleaner tomorrow. So thank you so much for taking your time today. We definitely appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's electric.
And now moving on in our presentation, again, more experts in this area of EV tax credits. I'd like to introduce to you John Hyam, who is a member of the Board of Directors for the Electric Vehicle Association. Oops. And a little background on John and why he's here today. So after a 32-year career in aerospace, John has retired and devoted his time to the transition to electric vehicles. During his aerospace career, he has been program manager for a NASA pollution monitoring satellite and has 12 U.S. patents on various aspects of satellite design. John's first EV was a Miata. He converted in his garage with his then teenage sons. And in the decade plus since that Miata, he has owned 8 different electric vehicles. John first joined the Electric Vehicle Association Board of Directors in 2018, and his focus with the EVA board is EV public policy and media content. John has written about the transition to electric vehicles for Inside EVs, the Electric Vehicle Association, and the EV Charging for All Coalition. John has visited over 50 countries and has written a book about travel and has contributed to numerous newspaper and magazine travel articles, including the New York Times. John has also contributed to other travel-related books, such as National Geographic's 100 Places to Take Your Kids. John's background leads him to have a discussion today about the impacts of the EV tax credit. So I'm going to leave it to you, John, to share with the group.
Thanks, Kate. Okay. The first thing we'd like to talk about is exactly what is this cash on the hood tax credit. EV advocates have been excited for this cash on the hood tax credit for years, and now that it's here, there are a number of nuances that we need to discuss and a little bit of confusion. So that's what we're going to dive right into. Before January of this year, the tax credit was a credit that you applied for when you filed your taxes. And it could also be limited based on your tax liability. Both of those have now been waived, and you are eligible to get an instant tax credit when you purchase your qualified EV. It's important to know that this is still a tax credit and it's not a rebate. As such, it is subject to various IRS rules, which we're going to get into in the coming slides. Before I go much further, I'd like to say all of the material that I am presenting is part of an article that I wrote. It's on the EVA website, and you can get to it. If someone would put it in the chat, you can get to it by going to bit.ly/EVA7500, where EVA is in all caps. So all of my information I'm presenting here, I'm going to be going through rather quickly, but if you want to read it at your own pace, you can find it at that link. Next slide. One of the important things you need to remember when you're seeking to exercise this point of sale tax credit is that you need to go to a qualified dealer, and not all dealers are qualified. There are about 18,000 dealers in the National Association, National Auto Dealers Association, and only about half, excuse me, half of those have applied, and not all of those who applied are approved. As of January 25th, I am not aware of a list of approved dealers. So there's really only one good way to find out if your dealer that you want to buy from is approved, and that's simply to ask. Now, when you buy an EV from an approved dealer, the dealer is going to ask you some questions about your income, your social security number, things like that, a couple simple questions, and they are going to issue you a seller's report. If you don't get the seller's report, you're not getting the benefit from the cash on the hood tax credit. It's very important. You do not want to drive away from the dealer's lot without having that seller's report. And again, the information on that seller's report is reported to the IRS, and you will have to use that seller's report when you file your taxes the following year. Next slide. Another important aspect to remember is that not all EVs are eligible. The most important thing is that the car must be certified by the manufacturer that it meets the qualifications. The two primary qualifications are final assembly in North America and that it meets the battery sourcing requirements. Each one of those requirements is half of the $7,500 tax credit. And if you meet one and not the other, you only get half the tax credit. In addition to being certified by the manufacturer, it must be on the EPA approved list. So, and that EPA approved list is at fueleconomy.gov, and we'll be showing you that link here in a moment. But I want to stress that even if the EV meets the qualifications, it must be certified by the manufacturer, and it has to appear on the EPA approved list. Some of those qualifications are it meets the MSRP with all factory installed options, and I'm going to talk about that more in a bit. And that MSRP limit is $5,500 for cars and $80K for trucks. There is a VIN check. The granularity of each car coming off of the assembly line is checked by VIN. Now, the consumer shouldn't need to go to do that VIN check. That's something that should be done at the dealer when you're ready to purchase. But it is that granularity is required because of the final assembly and the battery sourcing requirements. And we're going to talk more about that in the coming slides. Next slide. There are income limits for the taxpayer. That's $150K for single filers, $300K for married filing jointly, and $225K for head of household. This is your AGI when you file. And you'll have to predict that ahead of time when you buy your car and you submit that information to the dealer, and they give you the seller's report when you take delivery of your car. Next slide. That is a segue into one of the most obvious questions is, what happens if you accidentally make more money than you predicted when you bought your car? Well, that's a good problem to have, but the answer is really simple. You need to pay it back. So you'll be paying that back, not to the dealer, but to the IRS when you file your taxes. There is one exception to that, and that is if you marry during the year and your spouse's incomes put you over the tax limit, then you still get to keep your rebate that you got when you bought your car. Next slide. Another important aspect is in previous years, if you did not have enough tax liability to take benefit of the full credit, then you only got the credit that you got was only up to your tax liability. So in other words, if you owed $4,000 in taxes at the end of the year and you bought an EV with a $7,500 credit, you'd only realize $4,000 of that potential credit. starting in 2024, that tax liability requirement has been waived when you exercise this at the point of sale. I want to talk about that just real briefly. The point of sale tax credit is not required. You don't have to exercise your tax credit at the point of sale. You can still take tax credit when you file your taxes. So, for example, if you buy a qualified EV, but the dealer was not pre-authorized by the IRS, you can still get your tax credit when you file your taxes. But one of the important aspects of this is the tax credit liability is now waived when you do it with the point of sale. Next slide. One of the big advantages that started in January, as the congressman mentioned, is that used EVs now qualify. There's a potential credit up to $4,000. As with new EVs, the dealership must be registered with the IRS. They must be qualified. You still have to get your seller's report and so forth. The maximum allowable incomes are lower than a new EV. It's $150K for married filing jointly, $112.5K for head of household. All other filers is $75K. Next slide. With the used EV, the car must be more than 2 years old, and it is not subject to the same assembly and sourcing requirements. So any EV that meets all the other requirements, and I'm just going to use it as an example of BMW i3, final assembly not in North America, but if you can find one that's 2 years old and meets the MSRP requirement of $25K, it will qualify. So it is not subject to the same sourcing requirements. Oh, and another requirement is, of course, that the used vehicle must not have been previously used. So there is, again, a VIN check. Next slide. One of the important things is that everything I mentioned refers to EVs that were purchased and not leased. All of the rules that I've talked about do not apply to leases, and I think Elaine is going to talk more about this. But the lease company is the one who takes the EV tax credit, and they are subject to different rules than individual consumers. Now, consumer reports, if you get a hold of this slideshow, this is a live link right there. Consumer Reports maintains a list of what EVs are being offered lease incentives through various leasing companies. So that is an important thing to bear in mind, that leases are different, subject to different rules. Next slide. Finally, here's a list of all the EVs that are qualified, and this is a dynamic list. So it is subject to change as more manufacturers certify. On the left are those that are qualified for the $7,500 credit, and on the right, they only get half of that for one reason or another. One thing I do want to mention is I'm just going to use the example of the Rivian R1S. Its MSRP is under $80K, but if you check just one box on that option list, like the high-end paint, it'll put you over that $80K, and it will not be eligible for that credit. So that's why the VIN check is so important as part of this process. I think that's my last slide. Oh, sorry, not my last slide. 4 primary takeaways. Purchase from a qualified dealer. Get that sales report before taking delivery. Make sure you buy a qualified vehicle, and don't accidentally earn too much money the year you take possession. Back to you, Kate.
Thank you, John. And again, we're going to have an opportunity to ask specific questions towards the end of the presentation today. So please make sure if you have questions related to what John had presented, put them in that Q&A chat on the bottom of your screen. Again, folks in the chat can vote the questions up, and hopefully we'll do our best to get to all of those at the end of the presentation. Next up, I want to introduce Dr. Elaine Buckberg. Dr. Buckberg is a senior fellow at the Salata Institute for Climate and Sustainability at Harvard University. Previously, she was chief economist of General Motors, and at GM, Elaine was responsible for assessing the impact of worldwide economic developments on the corporation and for providing advice on various competitive and economic policy issues. Elaine also headed up long term forecasting of auto segments and vehicles, including the forecasting and analysis of EV adoption. She led and participated in major strategic projects at the intersection of policy and business. Elaine also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy Coordination in the Office of Economic Policy at the U.S. Treasury Department. In that role, she advised the Treasury Secretary and other top officials on the wide range of domestic policy issues, including infrastructure, housing and housing finance reform, financial regulatory reform, virtual currency, and the retirement security. While at the Treasury, Elaine played a leading role in initiating and executing President Obama's Build America investment initiative on infrastructure, including authoring 2 white papers on public-private partnerships and innovation infrastructure financing. Thank you, Dr. Buckberg, for being here, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Good morning and good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here with EVA and all of you to talk about the Clean Vehicle Tax Credit. We'll talk about how it works at a little bit of a higher level and what's the economic impact so far that is higher level than the very practical details that John has just shared with you. So let's go to the first substantive slide. And here I want to remind you what changed from the pre-EV IRA tax credit to the IRA tax credit. Before, it was a straight $7,500 on consumer purchases and leases of any EV. And when I talk about EVs today, I'm going to be strictly talking about battery electric vehicles and not PHEVs, which are subject to slightly different rules. But the only restriction on the old one is it only applied to the first 200,000 EVs sold by any automaker. So actually, 2 automakers, Tesla and GM, had hit that threshold and lost the credit in 2019. The new credit is more complex, and there's 3. There's one for consumer purchases, there's one for commercial purchases, which affects leases, and used, as John mentioned. So for a consumer purchase, you're buying the vehicle with or without financing. It's up to $7,500, but really there are 2 credits, each of $3,750, one based on the battery components in the vehicle and the other on the critical minerals. For leases, as John said, it's the company that buys the vehicle and leases it to you, the financing company or the bank, that gets a credit of $7,500 that they can decide whether or not they're sharing some or all of that with the user in terms of how they price the lease. And of course, that used EV credit of up to $4,000. We're going to focus on the first 2. Let's go to the next slide. And so let's talk for a second. What are the policy objectives here? Well, they're really threefold in this new credit. 1, you're promoting EV adoption for its climate benefits. 2, you're trying to build a thriving domestic EV industry. And 3, you're trying to do so in a way that that domestic EV manufacturing is not vulnerable to foreign supply chains and that you don't spend federal money promoting manufacturing that is vulnerable. And so the new credit has all of these conditions. So let's look at the left 2 columns here. John, we've talked about the price level, and John's talked about those MSRP caps of $80,000 for truck, SUV, and van, $55,000 for cars, and those income limits, $150,000 single, $300,000 married. But there's all these requirements about the vehicle. Number 1, it must be assembled in North America. That's a threshold requirement. Number 2, the critical minerals need to come from North America or a free trade agreement partner, and the threshold rises every year. Similarly, battery components, they need to be made in North America, an increasing share every year. And then no China content in battery components or critical minerals. And for battery components, that rule went into effect this year, 2024, and for critical minerals, it happens next year. Now, that commercial tax credit, though, none of those rules apply. And that is what governs leasing. So let's go to the next slide and let's dig in a little more here. So now we're focused on that consumer purchase tax credit. And here you can see how the requirements of the share of critical minerals and the share of battery components ramp. For critical minerals, we've jumped from 40% to 50% requirement this year. For battery components, from 50 to 60. But also the hardest part here for the automakers, Starting this year, there can be no components coming from a foreign entity of concern, and that means China, most importantly, and also Russia, North Korea, and sponsors of terrorism. So that's what that zero components, battery components from China is the really hard threshold that changed this year. So what does it mean in terms of the number of eligible vehicles? Well, let's look at the next slide. So here, let's look what happened pre and post our IRA. And let's think about model years 2022 and 2023 first, because those were the ones that were in market when IRA passed. So before there were 26 EV models that were eligible, but importantly, if that was the majority of models, the vast majority of models, but not the majority of vehicles, because Tesla and GM weren't eligible, and Tesla had a dominant market share. As soon as IRA passed and that North American assembly criteria went into effect on August 17th of 2022, and no other changes happened, that went up to 11. And then and I'm sorry, I cannot see the right-hand side of the slide, so I'm going to look down for a second. And then when we got into 2023, you had 7 EVs that were eligible for the full 7,500 and 4 that were eligible for the 3,750 credit. So turning to the next slide, let's see what happened this year. So now I'm going to focus on model years 23 and 24, what's in market now. And on December 31st, there were 12 models in those 2 model years that were eligible for 7,500 and 5 for 3,750. But when we hit 2024, that drops because of these tougher requirements down to 6 EVs that get the full 7,500 and 2 that get 3,750. My count is different from John's because I'm counting only pure battery electric vehicles and not PHEVs. So next slide, please. But what else? Not every vehicle of a given model or trim will qualify. So first of all, when I say a model is eligible, I'm saying that some trims of that model are eligible because it can vary from trim to trim. But beyond that, there could be an automaker that's making a particular model and a particular trim where they've succeeded in having no China battery components in some of them, say 50%, I'm making up these percentages, but 50% still have China battery components. So some will be eligible and some will not. And that's why it's on a VIN or vehicle by vehicle level, and you need to check those details while you're at the dealer. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what happened economically? So EV sales have continued to rise in a pretty organic manner. There's no jumps and there's no drops here. So first of all, that black vertical bar before Q1 2023, that represents the IRA fully going into effect at the beginning of 2023. For the entire year of 2022, before IRA went fully into effect, 5.8% of US auto sales were EVs. By the fourth quarter of last year, it was 8.1%, hitting 1.2 million EVs for the year, or about 318,000. So no negative effect, but no clear positive effects with all this back and forth of which models are eligible, just more organic increase in trend increase in EV sales. Next slide, please. But we definitely see that the IRA is spurring a lot of investment in EVs. And so Jay Turner at Wellesley College has a fantastic website where he tracks every announcement that goes into the EV supply chain. And since IRA passed up to about 10 days ago, there were 81 new projects announced, and is announced as implying more than 50,000 new jobs and $79 billion in investment. You can see that these are arrayed across much of the country. And if you look at the bar graph on the bottom, you can see that after IRA passed, the number of announcements per month is simply higher in a way you can see with your eye. Let's turn to the next slide, please. And what is the composition of those investments? Well, MIT is looking at all of green manufacturing investments, things that are tied to, in many cases, IRA. And you can see here that batteries dominate, and that is the blue bottom part of these bars. Batteries are the biggest component of this upswing in clean energy and EV manufacturing investments. Turning to the next slide, please. But what about that lease provision? So it was only in very end of December of 2022, right before you hit 2023, that Treasury made clear that leased EVs would not be subject to the North American Assembly provisions that affected the purchase credit. So here you see the percentage of leases in all vehicles, and that blue line, that's roughly horizontal. Not much happens when you cross into 2023. And for EVs, and you can see an upswing in the percentage of EVs that are being leased as soon as you enter 2023. Turning to the next slide, we can dig in a little more. I know this is a complex graph. I'm going to walk you through it. So those 3 dashed lines, those are the share of leases of internal combustion engine vehicles. And you can see that when you enter 2023, the lines are roughly flat. There's no real upswing, and there's no real difference among the 3 lines, black being European made, blue being North American made, and yellow being Korean made. But look at the solid lines. At the bottom, the North American EV blue line, you can see doesn't move up much at all. Now, what would be a North American EV where it might be advantageous to lease versus sell? It could be either that the price exceeds those MSRP caps or that the household that's buying it exceeds the income caps. But the only way for Korean-made and European-made EVs to access the tax credit is through that commercial EV tax credit. And you can see the big upswing in the share of Korean EVs on the yellow line that were leased versus sold, and similarly in European EVs on the black line. So that is what I wanted to share with you about the EV tax credit and our economy. And I'm excited to discuss your questions now, along with John and Keith.
Thank you, Elaine, for walking us all through that. I know, like you said, it could be a little complex, so taking the time to kind of walk through all of those different ins and outs and the pieces to be aware of as an EV driver or soon to be EV driver is definitely very helpful. So I'm going to switch over, and what I'm going to do for John, Dr. Buckberg, I'm going to throw the questions out there, and whoever feels most comfortable answering some of the questions in the queue, just kind of hop right in. We're going to do
Okay.
this. There was a couple that I think were already
I
answered
did mark a couple that I was willing to answer live. I mean, I started reading through them and there were so many, I just couldn't get through them all.
I saw that, John. You're very, very eager this morning. So I wanted to just go through maybe a couple, just so that the general population and those listening could hear those answers too, in case they weren't following along in the chat. And one of the questions that I think is really important is someone had asked, for used cars, do you have to go through a dealer? So maybe someone could take that question and kind of explain that one.
Yes, the first used cars are only eligible if the first sale through a dealer. And again, it has to be 2 model years older than the current year. So in 2024, it needs to be model year 2022 or earlier.
Thanks, Elaine. That's exactly right. I would just put a little asterisk there and say, not just any dealer, they have to be a qualified dealer that's qualified with the IRS.
Awesome. And then there was another question that I know we had already answered, but I'd love to put it out there into the ether, is that if I buy an EV in 2024, can I use my AGI from 2023 for the credit?
I'm happy to take that, but Elaine, if you want to, please chime in. So it's for you have to project ahead your 2024 AGI. And if you anticipate your 2024 AGI is going to be much different than your 2023, it's a struggle that a lot of us are going to have to deal with. I know that my income over the last few years has gone up and down as my employment situation has changed, and that's not important for this discussion, but I'm just empathizing that I know how difficult it can be. But if your 2024 AGI is projected to be similar to 2023, sure, use your 2023. But if you happen to know you're going to be earning much more because you got a better job, or much less, maybe because you retired, then you need to use your projected 2024.
Thanks, John. There was a question that just everybody's voting now. Thank you guys for everybody in the chat for voting these questions up. There was a question here, and I think it's actually really important again to answer today because it's different. It's part of that difference from last year to this year. Oh, where did it go? If the buyer has no tax liability, can they still qualify for the used EV tax credit transferred to dealer? So again, I think this is some of that confusion between the rules from last year into this year. So if we want to kind of go into that, again, this is about that. If a customer or if a consumer has no tax liability, can they qualify?
Oh, absolutely. So this is a cash on the hood tax credit. So you qualify if you buy a qualified car, you buy it from a qualified dealer, and then you will benefit from the credit. Doesn't matter if it's new or if it's used. You will still get that cash on the hood credit if you meet all the requirements, including the MSR. Well, for new, it's MSRP. For used, it's negotiated price. That does not include tax.
Thank you. There is a question out here from Mike Larson. He says, I didn't get a clean vehicle seller's report when I purchased my EV in January of 2024, early January. Can I print the form and have the dealership fill it out? Does anybody know about that process? Would they
I'm
take that
happy to
one?
answer it, but I don't want to be dominating the airways. Elaine, if you want to. Okay. The answer is if you already purchased your EV and you did not get a seller's report, then you're not going to get the tax on the hood tax credit. That doesn't mean you can't get the tax credit, but you're not going to get it at the time of sale. So printing out the form after the fact is not going to do any good. But when you file your 2024 taxes in April of 2025, you can still apply for the credit, but you still need to meet the income limits. The EV still needs to be qualified, and you also waive your ability to get the full tax $7,500 credit if you don't have enough liability. Meaning that if your tax liability is only $4,000 and you have a $7,500 tax credit, when you file your taxes, the IRS is not going to give you $3,500 return. You're just going to get the tax credit up to the point of your liability.
I just want to jump in here. For those who are contemplating buying an EV later in the year, part of the reason you really want to assess this at the dealer and make sure to get it at the dealer if you're eligible is if you're financing. And if you're financing, then that would enable you to essentially pay less upfront at the dealer and finance on a lower amount, which would also affect your interest bill. So I thoroughly encourage those who are making a purchase later this year to make sure to go through everything at the dealer and determine eligibility.
Spoken like a true economist.
Dakota asks, where can we find out if a used vehicle has already had the credit and makes it ineligible? That's an important question.
That is an important question, and I don't know that answer unless it is right at the dealer. The dealer is incentivized to take advantage of that credit. And so there's got to be a mechanism for them to look that up with the IRS. And I'm sure that's going to be part of the VIN check, but I don't know that answer. Elaine, I see you come off mute.
No, I
Okay.
was just going to say that in addition that I also believe that the dealers have a way of checking VINs with, I believe, the IRS, but at least early in 2024, the set of those that will have had the used credit before will be negligible. So it's a little less of a problem this early on. It becomes more of an issue in the future.
That's a very good point.
I've heard that same thing as well, that right now the initiative is with the dealer to do that VIN check on those used EVs for the consumers. And that the process is obviously being rolled out as far as how in the future, once we start registering more used electric vehicles, how we're going to be able to, as a consumer, look that up before we make that deal. I just want to throw out there too, and again, I thank everybody for all these great questions. As someone who just recently went through purchasing a new electric vehicle, the dealership that I actually dealt with was very, they pointed out to me that EV drivers and people who are looking to purchase their EV are a very educated bunch. And I want to thank you. And this is absolutely testament to that, that everybody is on this webinar learning about how to take advantage of these tax credits. So very often when you walk into a dealership, you are armed with a lot of information. So I want to thank you all for taking the time today and continuing to ask these questions so that we can move forward and continue the adoption of electric vehicles. But it's definitely been put out there that you walk into a dealer and EV drivers and potential EV drivers like to do their homework. So thank you so much for participating. And if we don't get to all of your questions here, you can obviously send them through the links to your EVA, and we can try to answer them that way through our blogs and other channels as well. We have time for just a couple more. Folks did put out there that the recording will be sent out through the Electric Vehicle Association. So if you're not registered for our information through our website or through our virtual newsletter, please make sure you log in and sign up so that you can get this link and the additional information. Let me see, number one that's voted up in the top. How do we prevent dealerships from taking all or part of the EV credit by raising the price of an EV? I have experienced this firsthand. Michael, I'm sorry to hear that. Any suggestions?
Competition.
Exactly.
Shop around.
Market competition.
Yeah.
It's a very competitive market for selling vehicles. And dealers are generally, vehicles are generally selling at discounts rather than markups again. And so that does create an incentive for the dealers to play fair and not price up.
Yeah.
This kind of goes, I was going to say, the next question here from Chris says, is there any discussion of raising the upper limit of the $25,000 on the price of a used EV that qualifies for the $4,000 used vehicle tax credit? He says, if you have shopped for used mid-range EVs like an ID4, you'll see that almost all of them are priced higher than that $25,000.
I think that's a question for the congressman. Too bad he's not here, because that will require a change to the tax code.
But I think part of the point here is that the used EV tax credit is designed to make EVs accessible to more buyers. So it's the buyer who's buying an older EV, one that doesn't have the same market value. And the income caps are substantially lower, as John showed you. And so if you're being able to buy a next to new EV, maybe the used EV tax credit is not intended for you unless you decide to slide down the price curve a little bit.
Thanks, Elaine.
I'm trying to look down because there's a lot of questions that are very similar. If you have a small company with very small revenue, can you take advantage of the business EV tax credit? Anybody want to give some insight?
The business commercial EV tax credit is available to any business that takes depreciation on its taxes. So essentially, if you file your taxes as a business rather than filing it as personal income, you are eligible. That means a landscaping company with one truck is eligible.
And on that point too, where my kind of expertise comes into is on top of that, when you purchase that vehicle for a small business, some businesses can also take advantage of the alternative fuel vehicle refueling property credit. So there's credits out there for the infrastructure side of your business as well. Again, we didn't kind of touch on that today, but know that fueling your electric vehicle is part of that ecosystem. So as a business owner, you can not only take advantage of a credit to switch your fleets or the vehicles that you're driving every day, but you can also take advantage of tax credits to put in infrastructure as well so that you can charge it at your business or even potentially offer it to your customers or employees. So there's some great incentives out there that our representatives are putting out so that we can continue that adoption of EVs for not just your consumers for your home use, but also for your businesses as well. Last question that I think we're going to have time for today is, for example, Kia is advertising a $7,500 lease bonus. I assume this is related to the commercial EV program.
I think that's absolutely correct. Elaine, I don't know, I think this is your area of expertise about how leasing companies work, but
I would say it's not transparent, right? What a leasing company does, often a leasing company that's tied to an automaker, is doing isn't transparent. You know that they are getting the tax credit. How much they're passing through in the way they're pricing the lease is really not that transparent. I think they're trying to signal to you that they're trying to price it attractively, and they're suggesting that they're passing on at least some of the commercial EV tax credit, but it's simply not transparent on the leasing side. Lease pricing is very complex. It considers not only the price of the vehicle, but the price that they expect it to be, the market value they expect it to have in 3 years when your lease ends, interest rates, your credit. It's very hard to evaluate.
Thank you for that. And again, I know that there's more questions in the chat. I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to address them live. Some of these questions that are coming in are great. John, thank you so much for participating. Dr. Buckberg, thank you. To Congressman Tonko, we appreciate your time stopping in this morning and all you're doing to advocate for moving towards more electric vehicles and a cleaner tomorrow. As you'll see up on the screen, you can download some of this information. You can get the Cash on the Hood full report by scanning the QR codes. I encourage you all to join the Electric Vehicle Association if you're not already involved. Please make sure you connect with your local chapters or the national organization if you're looking to find a chapter close to you. And if there isn't a chapter close to you, and also reach out and consider that you start one because there's a lot to be going on. There's a lot of conversations going on right now about EVs, EV infrastructure, and we need all of your support and your voices behind it. The Fuel Economy Government site, which we've talked about several times to kind of find the most up-to-date information as we continue to evolve all the information associated with the IRA and the EV tax credit. That QR code is up on the screen as well. And again, here are some of our links. We'll be sending these out here, but please make sure that you are connected with the Electric Vehicle Association. Join us on Facebook, check us out on YouTube, make sure you're connected with us on LinkedIn and Instagram, and share your stories. We have members, representatives, members of Congress, members of Senate, members of our leadership community are all looking for us and looking for our input as they continue to drive forward and drive change. So thank you so much. Again, please consider being part of our organization. We appreciate you all taking the time today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next set of webinars that'll be coming up soon. Thank you again, and have a great day.